Today we have a pretty hefty round of balance tuning changes for the phase 2 of the alpha in Midnight, so we haven't even gotten settled down with all of the changes to the specs for the release of Midnight, that we already have some balance tuning on top of it. So for Death Knight we start with some interesting changes, not this one, not Epidemic extending your dots by an extra second. You have Army of the Dead also spawning an Abomination and a Gargoyle on top of your 8 lesser ghouls, and the damage scaling of Forbidden Knowledge, no longer 300% physical damage, but 195% Shadow Strike damage. Now, you are wondering why 195 lower than 300, this one being bad. It's good because as a DK, as an Unholy DK, your Mastery does give you more Shadow damage. So now your Apex talent has been changed to doing damage that can scale harder and higher thanks to your Mastery. There is also some better, I guess, wording changes on Unholy Aura. What has changed is that now each Magus of the Dead under your command gives you more Mastery. This is the last capstone talent, which makes you consume your ghouls and then turn them into a Magus. This is the whole main change of the Midnight version of Unholy. You are completely moving away from your festering wounds and blowing up the wounds, etc, etc. Now instead you summon lesser ghouls, which last for a little bit. Most of them, you will spawn them from consuming Sudden Doom and spawning your ghouls, and then you have a whole bunch of talents that can buff the ghouls in different ways, like enrage them for more damage, giving them more damage, or making them last longer. And then you have the whole buff from your Apex talents tied to Army of the Dead. For Unholy, Frost doesn't get anything nearly as exciting. You have the change to Frigid Hunger turned into Frigid Resolve for Deathbringer, which is actually a nerf, because now you won't get 10% crit when Reaper's Mark explodes, you just get a 50% buff to your Permafrost. So bigger absorb shields on yourself when you do damage, which isn't actually a damage buff for Frost DK. The other reasonable change for DK are the general 3 talents. Now you have 2 ranks of your absorb shield effectiveness, Gloom Ward, and you also have 2 ranks of your haste, up to 4%. You also have this new talent: when you drop below 50% HP, your own ghoul will lose HP to heal you. And then you have a follow-up of Death Pact. Death Pact CD reduced by 30 seconds, and now you also take 50% more healing once you have the healing absorb of Death Pact. Now, just to pinpoint how tanky DK is, they are so tanky, even in high keys. They don't even bother to take this talent. And this talent is free. You know, you could just lose the slow of Death and Decay, or lose the 15% absorb shield on you to gain a legitimate cooldown. And they still don't do it. They still just ignore this button. I think come Midnight, this will be taken as a button for DKs. Now for Havoc Demon Hunter, you do have a defensive buff on your Blur. This reads like, why would it change to a 1-minute cooldown to a 1-minute recharge? Because your capstone that right now is nowhere to be seen, once you go over to the beta, you will find the capstone that gives you 1 more charge of Blur. Now what makes this confusingly OP is the fact that sure, you get 2 charges of Blur. It's already confusing because I thought this was the expansion where we were getting rid of defensiveness, tankiness, self-sufficiency of players, and yet we are giving a second defensive charge to a spec that already isn't particularly weak in defensiveness. But then there is the even more confusing part. Slip into the Nether when you active Blur, increasing your move speed and becoming immune to damage for 2.5 seconds. This is giving Demon Hunter a 1-minute cooldown immunity. That's what it is. Now you have a 1-minute cooldown immunity as a Demon Hunter, which is insane. What makes this even more insane is that this is a choice node with Desperate Instincts. Blur now reduces damage taken by 10%. Why would you care about taking 10% less damage inside of Blur when you can just become immune? This is a bit weird. I'm not advocating for nerfing this, but I don't think this will stay as it is until the release of Midnight. Now similarly, and for an opposite reason, don't get alarmed as a Vengeance Demon Hunter when you read that your Demon Spikes is losing a charge. it goes from 2 charges to 1. That's because they are getting the same treatment as Havoc. Last capstone talent now gives you an extra charge of demon spikes. You also get a buff to Soul Cleave. Now Soul Cleave no longer hits 5 enemies, it hits all of them. Of course it has reduced damage beyond 5, but at least now it hits all of them. And also the healing you get back isn't 40% of attack power healing, but 240% healing, which is much bigger. Even if the heal increase is smaller, because the older version gave you 40% extra attack power healing for up to 2 soul fragments. Now it's only 20% for 2 soul fragments, but the base heal is so much larger in the new version of Soul Cleave. It's much better than you had before. The rest of the changes for Demon Hunter are just Devourer stuff that nobody here has any idea about, so we can just get rid of it. Druid gets a nerf. Luckily it's something irrelevant. Memory of Ysera healing you less because it now takes you more rage to heal yourself for a whooping 0.8% of your max HP. This was terrible already for Druid. The only main change is your Heart of the Wild simplification. As you might know, at this point Blizzard is on this quest to simplify everything, and this includes Heart of the Wild. You go from this 5-minute cooldown which buffs you for 45 seconds to cast 30% faster as balance or do 20% more damage. Now in the beta this simply reads: perform a powerful off-roll ability depending on your currently active shapeshift form, but the cooldown at least now is 2 minutes instead of 5. Basically, if you are not shapeshifted or if you are Guardian, you cast an empowered Wild Growth. If you are in Cat form, you cast an empowered Feral Frenzy, and if you are in Moonkin form, you cast Starfall. That's basically what it is. Now for Evoker, you do have some interesting changes for Devastation. Not this one, this is not interesting, this is a nerf. You lose your 20% damage increase of your spenders inside of Firestorm. The interesting one is the Strafing Run. Deep Breath now deals 20% increased damage, okay, but more importantly can be recast again within 18 seconds of being used. It's pretty cool. It is a bit unfortunate that this button is now on the last bracket of your talent, so in a very important slot, but you know, even as an Evoker you have kept the stun, for example, of Deep Breath, so you can now stun enemies, wait 15 seconds for example, and stun them again in a Mythic plus key, for example. For Evoker there isn't too much to be happy about. You have this minor change to Wings of Liberty. Before, your Verdant Embrace was reusable up to 2 extra times within only 3 seconds. Now it's reusable within 5 seconds, so you have at least room for being able to click a couple of extra GCDs before you have to use your extra charges of Verdant Embrace. The bigger change is, again, in the quest of simplification for the spec, is the removal of Call of Ysera as a trackable buff. Before this was the bigger buff that was generated through Verdant Embrace. Now it's passive. You don't get the 40% increased Dream Breath after you use Verdant Embrace. Now it's always active at 25% more, and Living Flame now is always active at 50% more healing instead of only being after your Verdant Embrace. This is obviously a major buff to Living Flame, because first of all, you were never using the empowered Call of Ysera to buff your Living Flame, and number 2, you spam way more than 1 Living Flame. It made sense to click Verdant Embrace and then click 1 Dream Breath, and then Dream Breath would last for like 25 seconds empowered by Verdant Embrace. But Living Flame is a single hit, it's very minor, so buffing this by 100% in the old version was awful. Now instead, healing 50% more all the time, it's a much bigger buff for Living Flame, especially for the Chrono Warden version of Evoker who does want to heal with Living Flame. So this will be a very, very powerful talent, but mostly just for Living Flame, not as much for your Dream Breath. Also good QOL for your damage as Flame Shaper. Now you do get not just Dream Breath to have a second charge, now you have Fire Breath to gain an additional charge. So Preservation was already one of the top damage dealers. As a healer, now with double back-to-back charge of Fire Breath, they have some pretty good burst, even more than what they already have right now in keys. However, they get nerfed in defensiveness, because right now in live you have your scales as your, main defensive, but then you also have your second defensive, Renewing Blaze, which can be at times be even stronger than Obsidian Scales when there is rot damage, when there is slower ticking damage rather than massive bursts, because you heal for 100% of the damage you're taking. Now, in the beta, this is, first of all, it is nerfed because now you are no longer healing for 100% of the damage you took. You are healing for 100% of the damage that Obsidian Scales reduced. Because now this is just an add-on to your Obsidian Scales. And it is also weaker than what it was. So it is a pretty significant nerf in your tankiness as an Evoker, losing Renewing Blaze as its own cooldown. Now, Beast Mastery does get a significant damage bump in terms of the scaling of your pet damage. Stomp gets its damage basically tripled compared to the scaling of the old Stomp. And Wild Rush, the new button, essentially to just AoE enemies in front of your pets, goes from 150% scaling of attack power to 300%. The nerf, though, is in the CDs of your abilities, and this is across the whole class, because in case of BM, you get less CDR on your kill command, but in case of marksmanship, you get less CDR of your aim shot. Both focused aim as well as target acquisition are giving you less CDR of your aim shot, and then for survival you get less CDR on your Wildfire Bomb, because now it's a flat 1 second CDR. Before it was half a second per auto attack, which was much bigger. Now, mages are pretty funny right now. Most of these changes are just aura like modifiers, very small changes to like periodic damage increases by 1.5%. It's very minor stuff. What is more relevant about Mage, or rather interesting about Mage, is that as we have been going through, for example, the purging on some of these defensive kits on specs, Mage isn't really losing much of anything besides mass barrier. In live, you are losing your mass barrier at the very end compared to what you have in Midnight, but you are gaining actually personal tankiness, because what replaces that is that now Prismatic Barrier gives you 10% extra magical damage reduction, and on top of this buffed Prismatic Barrier, now you still have Ice Block, you still have Ice Cold, you still have Alter Time, you still have the ability to reset the cooldown of your multiple Blinks or Shimmer after you Alter Time, and you still have Mirror Image, as well as Greater Invis, as well as Mass Invis, still in your kit. So as we are here going through how multiple specs are losing defensives or tankiness, of course, Mage doesn't even get touched significantly by these changes. Now, Remaster also pretty much doesn't get touched by these changes. Who does is Mistweaver. Mistweaver, we mentioned last time when we talked about healers, was one of the least touched specs in Midnight, and now they have gotten way more changes. So, for starters, Chi Harmony is removed. The healing increase of your new mist for the first 8 seconds, right? Too hard to track, too complicated. It doesn't make sense in the simplification mantra of Blizzard to keep this one in the game. Talking about simplification, your Jade Lightning Empowerment is also removed. Now it's no longer a buff you get after using Thunder Focus T, which you could save for big damage events and then heal for a lot with this one. Now it's passive and active at all times. Instead of doing 2000% more damage after you Thunder Focus T, now it's 300% damage increase, but at all times. So it's no longer really gonna be usable as basically a healing cooldown, a healing setup as a monk, just as a passive continuous damage, similar to a Shaman spamming Chain Lightning. Effectively, that's what it makes it. The other relevant removal of these talents is, first of all, Jadefire Teachings and your healing increase buff with your damage now permanent. It's no longer a 15-second long buff that you have to continuously reapply. It's just always there. And Mending Proliferation is also removed. The chance of your Enveloping Mist to spread around is now gone completely. A few others are gone too, but stuff like Mist Dispersion or stuff like Refreshment, these are just irrelevant. They weren't really like good talents anyways. The other main change is Rushing Wind Kick having its buff removed. They are changing the 4-second buff you have to keep up, which of course is too complicated, too complex, to just being a 5-player heal. Splash healing 5 players whenever you use Rushing Wind Kick, which is quite quite simplified compared to the current version of this button. Holy Paladin gets a purge of Crusader Strike, since it won't really be in your radar anymore as a Holy Paladin. So things like Shield of the Righteous now don't reduce the cooldown of Strike by 1.5 seconds, but of Holy Shock. Avenging Crusader doesn't have Crusader Strike's cooldown 30% reduced. Crusader's Might affects Holy Shock, reducing the CD of Judgment instead of your Strike again, as well as Reclamation, refunding the mana cost of only your Holy Shock instead of also your Crusader Strike. So it's just a purge of a button you're basically not gonna be using as a Holy Paladin. There are a few reasonable changes for Shadow Priest. First of all, Insidious Ire, so essentially your single target damage buff, is now also counting Mind Flay to do 20% more damage on the target. You also have Shadowy Apparitions, flat out doing more damage. Shadowy Insight no longer gives you an instacast Mind Blast, instead it just ignores the cooldown when it procs. And then you have the whole Void Torrent change, tearing open the Entropic Rift and changing Entropic Rift, because in Midnight now Void Torrent has moved into your Void Weaver hero talent, and that is what is proccing Entropic Rift. So they moved it here essentially. And yeah, in place of this you still have to get your talents replacing your Void Torrent and your Volley for Shadow Priest. Now, as for some relevant things, we have Sub Rogue getting its Apex talents. They have been added in Phase 2, they weren't there before. Now, damaging attacks that expend Shadow Techniques to generate combo points have a chance per stack expended to create a clone that will repeat that attack. Shadow clones have a 100% chance to also trigger the Shadow Techniques effect, and after using an attack that generates combo points, if you have 5 or more stacks of Shadow Techniques, your next damaging finishing moves will expend them to generate combo points up to your max, with also flat 10% increase the shadow damage. Now, for context, of course, Shadow Techniques isn't Shadow Technique. There's an extra S to this name, and that extra S refers to your passive effect. So it's the fact that you can store up to 10 combo points, and then attacks can consume the stored combo points to generate additional real combo points that you can actually then use for your finishers. It refers to that mechanics, not the actual ability, Shadow Technique. Now, for Shaman, there are some interesting changes, starting with a nerf. Now, Ascendance gives you 75% damage increase of your Elemental Overload instead of 150%. Fusion of the Elements had to be changed because Eye Fury is gone, so you cannot proc the Elemental Blast shot at your target for free at 60% effectiveness from the next spell you cast after Ice Fury. Instead, now it's after you consume Power of the Maelstrom, which very simply means casting Lava Burst has a chance to empower your next Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning. So once you consume those two, one of those two buffed by Lava Burst, you get to proc this free Elemental Blast on your target. Also, talking about simplification, Storm Frenzy. Before, Storm Frenzy was a buff that you got from casting Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt to have a 30% reduced cast time after you use a spender, and you could stack up twice. So you could use, spenders and then have 2 stacks of this to have a faster cast time next. Now instead it's a passive. It's just a flat out 15% faster casting of your Chain Lightning or your Lightning Bolt without having to keep track of this buff for Elemental Shaman. For Extra Shaman, besides getting your Healing Wave buffed by almost 20%, now this number is very large, 655% spell power healing for Healing Wave. The actual change is in the essentially reworking of the duration of your Farseer Ancestors. They pretty much get all of the tools that spawn them go from a default of 6 to a default of 8 seconds. So Ancestral Swiftness, and then you have Call of the Ancestors, and then you have Routine Communication. They all get the base duration of your Ancestors up to 8 seconds. The nerf you get though is Offering from Beyond. When an Ancestor is called, the CDR of Riptide goes from 3 seconds CDR to 2 seconds CDR. However, what Shaman also gets is its Apex talents for Resto, which were also missing. So Riptide has a 10% chance to buff your next healing stream totem to be empowered. Now it's gonna heal for 30% more, heal an extra maximum ally, and heal 2 injured ally instantly as soon as you put it down. Then the base healing is buffed by 60%, and then Stormstream Totem is usable for free and ignores the cooldown of your actual healing stream totem when this one procs. It's like Time Spiral. If you have no blink charges and then you have Time Spiral, you can expend a free extra charge to blink again. That's how this would work for this healing stream totem effect. And you know, it fits perfectly, of course, in Blizzard's plans of simplification. They are removing Cloudburst. Now your only options are just taking Healing Stream Totem and buffing Healing Stream Totem. And then you have an Apex Talents which buffs your Healing Stream Totem even more. But you know, of course, Healing Stream Totem is very, as you say, brain dead. You don't actually have to play around your Healing Stream Totem, so it's quite a simple button. Now the main news of Warlock here is that they all get their Apex Talents, all 3 of their hero talents. Hellcaller gets the 3 new ones, because once you go from level 82 to level 90, you get 3 levels in your General 3, 4 levels in your Spec 3, and then 3 levels in your hero talents. For Hellcaller, you have flat out more damage of your abilities depending on your spec, so Chaos Bolt, Unstable Affliction, Rain of Fire, whatever, and double the damage if you are inside of your Malevolence button. Then, more importantly, periodic damage dealt by Wither has a chance to grant Malevolence for 8 seconds. This obviously scales significantly more when you are in AoE, as you spread Wither on a 10 trash pack group in Mythic Plus. You have tons of chances to proc this. It seems even too OP because it will be active at all times with this effect. And then Malevolence will give you 4% extra haste and also gives you 2 extra stacks of Wither every time you cast it. Important wording here, and when cast increases the stacks. So not when this procs. When it procs Malevolence for free, this won't work. Only when you actually click the button yourself, you will get the 2 extra stacks of Wither. For Soul Harvester, you get 3 more. The Succulent Soul, right, the thing you can get from your soul shards, the empowered one. The Succulent Soul will unleash a demonic soul within you, enabling it to assault your enemies for 9 seconds with Soul Swipe. This talent simply buffs the effect. Now the soul here lasts for 14 seconds instead of 9, and the damage of Soul Swipe is increased by 10%, and then 4% more mastery, and the effect is doubled when this one is in effect, this one is active. You have seen Hellcaller and Soul Harvester, you're left with Diabolist, which is these 3 over here. You summon an Oculus, so an eye demon, every time you reduce the cooldown of Diabolic Ritual. And then the eyes you spawned explode when you gain or consume Demonic Heart. So when Diabolic Ritual expires and you gain Demonic Heart and you consume it with End of Gul'dan, you blow up these eyes for AoE damage. Also, your oculi, while they spawn, they also do damage to the enemies, and also after they spawn, they keep stacking the 2% intellect for 10 seconds. This is a stealing of the tier set you have as a Demoloch, the stacking intellect buff. If you are Diabolist, when you summon these eyes, they took basically part of the tier set of Diabolist for Warlock, and they put it in your actual hero talent in Midnight. Now, very important change for Warrior, Seasoned Soldier has added is in its wording, a significant change to how it works. It also changed Broad Strokes. Now the effect will not allow Sweeping Strike to extend 12 stacks. Instead, now the effect will not allow Sweeping Strike to exceed 12 charges. So major changes to arms as well as Fury. Now Reckless Abandon, Crushing Blow has a 25% chance to instantly reset its cooldown and have 20% more critical strike damage from Crushing Blows, instead of 335,096% additional damage. So massive, huge nerf to Fury Warrior with this change, and then also change to Champion's Spear. Before, the spear used to chain all enemies in the area to the spear for 6 seconds. Now it's gonna chain all enemies in the area and pulse them to within 8 yards of the spear. These are the changes in the second phase of the alpha when it comes to the balance tuning of the specs. If we can find a common trend across all of these changes for the alpha of Midnight, is of course the simplification, is the removing of certain buttons, certain abilities that were either difficult to track, or they were proc effects, or they were in some way considered too bloaty for your UI, which are being removed in favor of passive effects, in favor of streamlined effects for your spec, which we are seeing continue even in this current tuning that is going down for Midnight. So yes, I know there's a lot of skepticism around this kind of simplification. We will see eventually how it's going to turn out. For now, all we can do is just wait and see what is Blizzard's plan for all of these changes. But for today though, on this Thursday, this was the round of tuning for Midnight's alpha, and after this it is now time to leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes by thanking everyone for watching the video, together with of course everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, who knew? My gosh, who knew just reading a bunch of balance tuning changes could get on for so long?